Zara Imani sat perfectly still inside the reinforced dog cage, her silk maternity dress now stained with sweat and dust. The metal bars pressed cold against her shoulder blades as she cradled her 6-month belly, whispering promises to the child inside that she prayed she could keep. The air in the Florida estate's basement was thick and humid, heavy with the smell of concrete and abandonment. Only floors above her, Alejandro Vargas's voice carried through the ventilation shaft. Smooth, controlled, charming. He was hosting potential investors, describing his latest acquisition with the same calculated confidence he once used to describe his love for her. No one mentioned the woman locked below like a disobedient pet. No one knew she existed beyond these walls. Then the security monitors went dark, one by one. The hum of the estate's high-tech surveillance system died into silence. Alejandro's voice upstairs stopped mid-sentence. Outside, the crunch of gravel announced heavy vehicles rolling up the private drive. Black armored SUVs, 6 of them, stopped in perfect formation at the gates. Alejandro's hand trembled as he reached for his phone. Some men mistake power for protection. He was about to learn the difference. Where are you watching from today? And what's your local time? If you believe stories of Zara needs protection and love, subscribe and stay with us. By late afternoon, the Vargas estate looked exactly as it always had. The pristine white columns stood gleaming in the Florida sun. The manicured lawn remained flawlessly edged. Security cameras swept their usual patterns, now functional again, now recording everything. From the outside, nothing suggested a monster lived within those walls. Zara was the only proof. She heard his footsteps on the basement stairs. Slower than usual, hesitant. When Alejandro finally unlocked the cage door, her legs were numb, her back screaming, her body exhausted from hours of confinement and the weight of pregnancy. She did not look at him. Experience had taught her that eye contact only invited more cruelty. "Get yourself cleaned up," Alejandro said, his voice tight with something she'd never heard before. Fear. "We have guests." Zara rose slowly, gracefully despite the pain, and walked past him without a word. Silence had become her armor. It was safer than begging, safer than explaining humanity to a man who had convinced himself he was God. In the master bathroom, the one she was rarely allowed to use anymore, she leaned against the marble sink and studied her reflection. Her face was thinner now. The glow that pregnancy often brought had been replaced by shadows under her almond-shaped eyes. She touched her belly instinctively, feeling the reassuring movements of the baby, checking again that life was still there despite everything. She whispered a prayer her father had taught her as a child. A prayer for protection, for justice. This was not the marriage she had imagined. When Zara met Alejandro Vargas 2 years earlier in Madrid, he had been magnetic, brilliant, ambitious, attentive in ways that made her feel seen for the first time since leaving her family. He ran a mid-sized tech export company, often complaining about competitors and missed opportunities in the American market. Zara listened. She encouraged him. She helped him make connections through contacts she claimed were old college friends. She believed in him. Back then, Alejandro liked to tell people that Zara was his secret weapon. He said she brought him clarity, that her calm presence made him sharper in negotiations. "My beautiful mystery," he called her, amused that she never spoke about her past, that she seemed to have appeared in his life from nowhere. He thought her silence was submission. He never suspected it was strategy, that a woman raised in shadows knows exactly when to hide her face. The cracks began 3 months into the pregnancy. Alejandro's company lost its largest contract, a European distribution deal worth $30 million. The news came during breakfast. Zara watched his jaw tighten as he read the email, watched the way his knuckles went white around his coffee cup. She reached across the table to comfort him, but he pulled away. "This wouldn't have happened if you'd introduced me to your contacts sooner," he said quietly. Too quietly. Zara's hand froze midair. Alejandro, I gave you every connection I had. Did you? His dark eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her stomach turn. You're always so secretive, Zara. Always holding something back. Who are you protecting? Or are you just protecting yourself? The accusations came faster after that. Phone calls she couldn't explain. Old friends checking in that she dismissed as spam. A wire transfer from an account she claimed was an inheritance. In the way she sometimes woke from nightmares speaking in a language he didn't recognize. 2 weeks later, Alejandro announced they were leaving Madrid. A fresh start, he said, showing her photos of a remote Florida estate he'd purchased. Isolated, private, surrounded by wetlands and silence. Somewhere we can focus on us, on the baby. No distractions. Zara felt the trap closing but couldn't articulate why. She was 6 months pregnant, tired, and he framed it as romance, a sanctuary. She packed her modest wardrobe and left behind everything else, including the single emergency contact number she'd kept hidden in her jewelry box, the one she'd sworn never to use. The Florida heat hit her like a wall when they arrived. The estate was beautiful and suffocating. No neighbors for miles. No familiar faces. Just Alejandro, his growing paranoia, and the sound of gates locking behind her every single night. Zara was 7 years old the first time she watched her father make a man disappear. They were in the library of the Chicago estate, all dark wood and leather-bound books that no one ever read. Zara Imani sat behind his massive desk, his salt and pepper hair perfectly groomed, his expression unnervingly calm. The man kneeling before him was begging, explaining why the shipment had been delayed, why the money was short, why he deserved one more chance. Her father never raised his voice. He simply nodded to the men standing in the shadows. Zara remembered her mother's hand on her shoulder, firm but gentle, guiding her away before she could see what came next. "Strength, baby girl," her mother whispered. "We don't cry, we don't flinch. That's what it means to be an Imani." By 16, Zara had learned to read a room like her father read ledgers, calculating threats, identifying weaknesses, understanding that power was always a transaction. She attended elite schools where senators' daughters befriended her without knowing why their parents suddenly supported Imani-backed initiatives. She wore designer clothes that hid the weight of legacy pressed into her posture, but she also saw the bodies. The families destroyed when examples needed to be made. The way her father's eyes went dark and distant when he ordered something irreversible. "This is protection," Silas told her on her 21st birthday, sliding a diamond-encrusted ring across the table, the Imani crest in platinum. "Everything I do keeps you safe." Zara looked at the ring and saw a leash. 3 months later, she vanished during a charity gala in Madrid. No bodyguards, no family name, just a woman who wanted to believe that love could be clean, that she could build something without blood in the foundation. She had been so desperately, foolishly wrong. The first time Alejandro locked her in the cage, he explained it like a business decision. "You need to understand consequences, Zara," he said, adjusting his Patek Philippe watch with clinical precision. "I've given you everything. My name, my protection, my child growing inside you. And yet, you still keep secrets from me." She had made the mistake of refusing to unlock her phone when he demanded it. A small act of defiance that he couldn't tolerate. The cage sat in the corner of the basement storage room, originally purchased for the German shepherds he'd planned to buy but never did. And it was large enough that she could sit upright if she pulled her knees to her chest, not large enough to lie down, not with the pregnancy. 2 hours, he said that first day, then we'll discuss respect. 2 hours became 4. 4 became overnight. Zara learned quickly that begging only extended the sentence. Tears were treated as manipulation. Silence was the only currency he couldn't devalue. So she retreated into the fortress her father had built inside her mind during childhood. The mental discipline that came from growing up in a world where showing weakness meant death. She controlled her breathing, counted the baby's movements, recited poetry in 3 languages that her tutors had drilled into her. She became a statue, untouchable. Elsewhere, it infuriated him. "Say something," Alejandro would demand, crouching beside the bars, his perfectly styled hair falling slightly forward. Apologize, beg, react. But Zara had learned from masters of psychological warfare, men who broke governments and kings. Her father had prepared her for interrogation, for isolation, for pain. He had not prepared her for love turned to torture. But the training worked anyway. Each time Alejandro opened the cage expecting a broken woman, he found her eyes clear, her posture straight, her hands still protectively cradling their child. It was the one thing she wouldn't let him take. Rosa had worked at the Vargas estate for 11 years. She'd seen 3 different housekeepers come and go, watched Alejandro's business expand from comfortable to obscene, and learned long ago that wealthy men preferred invisible staff. She kept her head down, cleaned what needed cleaning, and asked no questions. But the sound coming from the basement wasn't something she could ignore. It was soft, so soft she almost convinced herself she'd imagined it. A woman's voice, barely above a whisper, singing something that sounded like a lullaby. Rosa paused at the top of the basement stairs, her cleaning cart forgotten, her hand gripping the railing. She'd been told the basement was off limits. Storage for sensitive business documents, Alejandro had said. The door required a key code she didn't have, but today, someone had left it slightly ajar. Rosa descended 3 steps, then 5. The singing stopped. In its place came the unmistakable sound of metal scraping against concrete, and then, silence so complete, it felt like a held breath. "Mrs. Vargas?" Rosa whispered. The response was immediate. "Please, please leave. And if he finds you here?" Rosa never heard the rest. A hand clamped down on her shoulder, spinning her around so violently she nearly fell. Alejandro's head of security, Marcus, filled the narrow stairwell, his expression carved from stone. "Mr. Vargas wants to see you in his office. Now." 20 minutes later, Rosa walked out through the estate's front gates with a severance check and a document she'd been required to sign. The non-disclosure agreement was 12 pages long. The penalty for violation was outlined in precise legal language that made her hands shake. As the gates closed behind her, she looked back once at the beautiful white house. From the outside, nothing suggested cruelty lived within those walls. But Rosa knew better now. And knowing, she realized with cold certainty, might be the most powerless position of all. The cramping started on the 4th day of confinement. Sharp, twisting pains that radiated from Zara's lower back and wrapped around her swollen belly like a vice. She pressed her palms against the cold metal floor of the cage, breathing through each wave, counting seconds the way her father's medic had once taught her. During combat training she was supposed to forget. When Alejandro descended the basement stairs that evening, she was curled on her side, her breathing shallow. "I need a doctor," she said quietly, not begging, stating fact. He crouched outside the cage, studying her the way someone might examine a malfunctioning appliance. "You're fine. Women have been having babies for thousands of years without running to hospitals every time they feel uncomfortable." "I'm bleeding," Zara whispered. Alejandro's jaw tightened. For a moment, something flickered behind his eyes. Concern, perhaps, or calculation. Then it vanished. "No doctors. Do you understand what they would see? What they would ask?" He gestured at the cage, at the bruises darkening her wrists from the metal bars. "You think I've built everything I have just to let some bleeding heart physician destroy it over your dramatics? The baby will be fine. You'll be fine. You're stronger than you pretend to be, Zara. I've always known that." He stood, brushing invisible dust from his tailored slacks. "This is for your own good. You'll thank me when you learn discipline." After he left, Zara lay in the darkness and felt another cramp tear through her abdomen. She had spent 2 years trying to be normal, trying to believe that love and patience could transform a controlling man into a safe one. Now she understood. Her normality wasn't protection. It was a death sentence. She reached beneath the loose floorboard where she'd hidden her phone during a brief moment of freedom 3 days ago, her fingers trembling as she pressed the emergency contact she swore she'd never use. Silas Imani did not believe in coincidences. When his daughter's monthly check-in call failed to come through for the 3rd consecutive week, he sat in silence at his desk for exactly 7 minutes. Then he made a single phone call. Within 2 hours, every digital footprint Zara had left in the past 18 months appeared on the screens before him. Bank transactions, passport scans, security footage from a Madrid hotel lobby where she'd smiled at a tall man in an expensive suit. Marriage license filed in Spain. Property records showing a remote estate purchase in Florida under the name Alejandro Vargas. Silas studied the man's face with the patience of someone who had built an empire on reading people. Sharp jawline, arrogant posture, the kind of man who confused money with power. "Background," Silas said quietly. His second-in-command, Marcus, pulled up files without hesitation. Alejandro Vargas, CEO, Vargas Global Exports. Net worth estimated at $400 million. No criminal record. No known associations with any families, ours or otherwise. "He's clean, sir." "Nobody's clean," Silas murmured. "Find the dirt." It took 48 hours, sealed court documents from Spain. A former employee who'd tried to file harassment charges before suddenly withdrawing them, and a pattern of controlling behavior buried beneath expensive lawyers and non-disclosure agreements. And then, the security footage that made Silas's blood run cold. Thermal imaging from a satellite pass over the Florida estate, purchased through channels that didn't officially exist. The main house showed multiple heat signatures, staff, presumably. But in the basement, isolated and alone, a single figure. Small. Unmoving for hours. Pregnant, according to medical records his people had acquired from a private clinic in Miami. Silas's hand curled into a fist, the family ring catching the light. "Mobilize the Southern team," he said, his voice dropping to something ancient and lethal. "My daughter is coming home." Alejandro's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary as he sped through the empty back roads toward the estate. The investor meeting had ended abruptly. 3 calls in rapid succession, all from his head of security, all going straight to a deadline the moment Alejandro tried to call back. The gate stood open when he arrived. Not damaged, not forced. Simply open, as if someone had politely been invited inside. His pulse hammered against his ribs as he stepped out of the car. The silence was wrong. The estate was never silent. There should have been the hum of generators, the soft whir of camera motors, the distant sound of the filtration system cycling pool water. Instead, the air hung still and heavy, thick with Florida humidity and something else he couldn't name. Every security camera along the drive pointed downward, lenses dark and lifeless. Alejandro's phone vibrated. A single text from an unknown number. "You have guests." He walked toward the front entrance, his expensive shoes crunching too loudly on the gravel. The door was unlocked. Inside, the marble foyer stretched empty before him, the afternoon light casting long shadows across imported tile. His state-of-the-art security panel beside the entrance was completely black, the touch screen dead despite the backup power system that should have kicked in automatically. Someone had systematically dismantled everything. A sound from the living room made him turn. Soft, deliberate, the clink of ice against crystal. Alejandro moved forward, his throat dry, his mind racing through possibilities. Corporate espionage, A business rival, some disgruntled former employee with connections. He'd made enemies. Powerful men always did. But this felt different. This felt personal. He stepped into the living room and stopped. A man sat in Alejandro's favorite leather chair, the one positioned to face the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the property. He was older, late 50s perhaps, with salt and pepper hair cut close and neat. His dark suit was immaculate but understated, the kind of tailoring that whispered wealth rather than shouting it. He held a glass of Alejandro's most expensive bourbon, the bottle that cost more than most people's monthly salary, and regarded it with the mild interest of someone sampling tap water. He didn't look up when Alejandro entered. "Mr. Vargas," the man said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Alejandro's confusion lasted only a second before he noticed the ring on the man's right hand, heavy gold, engraved with a symbol he'd seen before, on a delicate necklace Zara wore in their early days together, before he'd made her remove all jewelry that referenced her past, the symbol of the Imani family crest. "Where is my daughter?" The gates didn't just open, they were removed. The wrought iron twisted like paper as the lead SUV pushed through, its armored front barely registering the impact. 5 more vehicles followed in perfect formation, their tinted windows reflecting the Florida sun like black mirrors. They moved with military precision, fanning across the circular driveway in a coordinated pattern that spoke of countless operations executed exactly this way. Alejandro stood at the window of his study, phone pressed to his ear, waiting for his security team to answer. The line remained dead. His private security, his state-of-the-art system, his carefully constructed fortress, all of it had been neutered in minutes by people who understood that real power doesn't announce itself with alarms. The SUVs stopped. Doors opened in synchronized silence. 12 men emerged first, dressed in black tactical gear but moving with the disciplined calm of soldiers who had nothing left to prove. They formed a perimeter, hands resting near concealed weapons, eyes scanning with professional detachment. Then the rear door of the center vehicle opened. Silas didn't rush. He adjusted his cufflinks with the same casual authority Alejandro used in boardrooms, then walked toward the front door as if he'd been invited. 2 of his men moved ahead to open it. They didn't knock. Alejandro met them in the foyer, trying to summon the commanding presence that had built his empire. "This is private property. I don't know who you think you are, but..." "Silas Imani." The voice was quiet, measured, with the faint rhythm of old money and older violence. "I'm here for my daughter." The words hit Alejandro like cold water. Daughter. He thought of Zara's careful evasions about her past, her unexplained elegance, the way certain people seemed to defer to her without reason. The mystery he'd found so intriguing now felt like a noose tightening. "I don't know what she's told you, but..." "Where is the cage?" Silas interrupted, his dark eyes finally meeting Alejandro's. The question was surgical. It told Alejandro everything. They knew. They had always known. Zara had never been the helpless orphan he'd imagined. She had been a princess in exile, and he had just committed an act of war against a kingdom that didn't negotiate. Silas took a step forward. Alejandro, for the first time in his adult life, took a step back. "Take me to my daughter," Silas said softly, "or I will dismantle this house brick by brick until I find her myself." It wasn't a threat. It was a forecast. Alejandro's hand trembled as he pointed toward the basement stairs. 2 of Silas's men descended first, their footsteps echoing in the concrete stairwell. When they reached the basement and saw the cage, one of them turned away, jaw clenched. The other pulled out his phone, documenting everything with silent efficiency. Silas followed, his measured composure finally cracking when he saw his daughter. Zara sat on the cold floor, one hand protectively over her belly, her silk dress ruined. But when she looked up and saw her father, she didn't cry. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and became exactly what she was born to be. "Hi, Papa," she said quietly. Silas knelt beside the cage, his ringed hand reaching through the bars to touch her face. "I'm sorry I took so long, Mpenzi." His voice broke on the Swahili endearment. "This should never have happened." "I know." Zara's composure finally wavered. "I wanted to be normal. You are my daughter. You were never meant to be small." One of his men had the cage open within seconds. Silas helped Zara to her feet with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the violence radiating from every other man in the room. He removed his suit jacket and draped it over her shoulders. Upstairs, Alejandro waited, his wealth and power suddenly meaningless. When Silas emerged with Zara, the billionaire opened his mouth to speak, to explain, to negotiate, to offer money. Silas held up one hand. Silence fell instantly. "You have 48 hours to liquidate everything you own," Silas said, his voice returning to that terrifying calm. "Every asset, every account, every property. You will donate it all to women's shelters across Florida. If you resist, or you will simply disappear." He guided Zara toward the door, his arm protective around her shoulders. "And Mr. Vargas?" Silas paused at the threshold. "If you ever speak her name again, even in prayer, I will hear it." The SUVs rolled away as smoothly as they'd arrived, leaving Alejandro standing alone in his empty empire, finally understanding what it meant to be powerless. Please take a moment to like and subscribe. Your support encourages us to bring more awesome stories. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when we drop the next chapter. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that true power isn't found in wealth or status, but in the courage to live with dignity and grace. Your engagement helps us create more stories that celebrate resilience, redemption, and the kind of love that changes everything. Thank you for being here, and thank you for believing that every person's story matters. We'll see you in the next one.